What if I told you that time doesn't flow the same for everyone? That right now, time is moving faster for someone on a mountaintop than for someone at sea level? This isn't science fiction. This is reality. And we know it because of one man, Albert Einstein. But here's what will surprise you: the man who became the face of genius was once considered a failure. His teachers said he'd never amount to anything. After university, no professor would hire him. He was unemployed, desperate, rejected everywhere. At 26, he was working in a patent office, evaluating other people's inventions, unknown to the world. His marriage was falling apart. He had a secret daughter he abandoned and never spoke of again. And then, in one incredible year, 1905, he wrote 4 papers that destroyed the old physics and rebuilt reality itself. Time could slow down. Space could bend. Mass and energy were the same thing. The universe was nothing like we thought. 10 years later, he proved gravity wasn't a force at all, it was the curve of space and time itself. Scientists were skeptical until a solar eclipse in 1919 proved him right. Overnight, he became the most famous scientist who ever lived. But fame had a dark side. The Nazis burned his books and put a bounty on his head. His equation, E=mc², led to the atomic bomb, and he spent his final years haunted by it. When he died, a doctor stole his brain, hoping to find the secret of genius hidden in the tissue. The greatest mystery? Einstein spent 30 years trying to solve one final problem, a theory of everything that would explain all the forces of nature in a single equation. He never found it. Scientists are still searching today. Why does his story matter? Every time you use GPS, you're relying on Einstein's relativity. Every medical scan, every smartphone, every scientific breakthrough about black holes and gravitational waves, it all traces back to him. But more than that, Einstein showed us something profound: the dropout who failed his entrance exam, the patent clerk nobody wanted. He proved that being different isn't a weakness. It's the very thing that might let you change the world. Before we dive in, if you love stories of extraordinary minds, please subscribe to Ecolib for more audiobooks like this. Your support means everything. Now, let's go back to where it all began, to a 5-year-old boy, sick in bed, holding a compass. The needle always points north. Always. And the boy asks the question that will change everything: why? This is the story of Albert Einstein. And I promise, the truth is stranger than you can imagine. Chapter 1: The Compass and the Rebel. March 14, 1879. In a small apartment above a shop in Ulm, Germany, Pauline Einstein gave birth to a son. When she first saw him, she was terrified. His head was enormous, oddly shaped, almost grotesque. The doctor assured her it would normalize, and it did. Within weeks, baby Albert looked like any other child. But that moment of fear would prove strangely prophetic. This child's mind would indeed be different from everyone else's. Albert's father, Hermann, ran an electrical engineering business with his brother Jacob. Their shop hummed with the new technology of the age: dynamos, arc lamps, equipment powered by the mysterious force called electricity. Young Albert grew up surrounded by invisible powers that made lights glow and motors spin. The modern world was being invented all around him. When Albert was 5 and sick with a fever, his father brought him a gift, a pocket compass. Albert was mesmerized. Turn it left, turn it right, shake it, flip it over, the needle always swung back to point north. Always. Something invisible was controlling it. Something he couldn't see or touch was reaching through empty space, moving that needle. Decades later, near the end of his life, Einstein would say that moment shook him to his core. It revealed that behind the surface of things, hidden forces were at work. The world was not what it appeared to be. That realization, that wonder at the invisible, would drive everything he did. But young Albert was not an easy child. He spoke late, not forming full sentences until he was nearly 3. His parents worried. What they didn't know was that Albert was processing language differently. He would construct entire sentences in his mind, testing them, perfecting them before speaking them aloud. Even as a small child, he was thinking in a way that was uniquely his own. His mother Pauline was cultured and artistic, and she insisted Albert learn the violin. He hated it at first. The rigid lessons, the scales, the discipline, it felt like torture. But at 13, something changed. He discovered Mozart's sonatas, and suddenly music became a passion. The violin would be his companion for life, a tool for thinking. When stuck on a problem, he would play. The music somehow unlocked his mind. At 12, Albert experienced what he called his second wonder. A family friend gave him a geometry textbook. Albert devoured it like a novel, working through each proof with fierce intensity. The idea that you could start with simple axioms and build absolute truths through pure logic enchanted him. He called it the Holy Geometry Booklet. Here was a universe of perfect certainty, where truth could be discovered by thinking alone. But the real world was far less perfect. Einstein attended Catholic elementary school in Munich, one of the few Jewish students. The authoritarian teaching methods, memorization, obedience, rigid discipline, felt like a prison to him. Teachers demanded answers, not questions. They wanted conformity, not curiosity. Einstein's natural independence clashed with every rule. His uncle Jacob noticed Albert's gift for mathematics and began giving him problems to solve, turning abstract concepts into puzzles. Algebra is a merry science, he would say. We go hunting for a little animal whose name we don't know, so we call it X. When we bag our game, we give it the right name. Einstein loved these hunts. By age 15, Einstein was teaching himself calculus, far beyond what his school offered. He was bored in class, contemptuous of teachers who taught by rote rather than understanding. One instructor told him he would never amount to anything, that his mere presence disrupted the class. The feeling was mutual. Then came the crisis. In 1894, Hermann's business failed. The family decided to move to Italy to start fresh. But Albert was left behind in Munich to finish school. For a sensitive 15-year-old, this abandonment was devastating. Alone in a city that felt hostile, in a school he despised, separated from everyone he loved, it was unbearable. Einstein made a bold decision. He obtained a medical certificate claiming nervous exhaustion and convinced a mathematics teacher to write a letter confirming his advanced abilities. Then he simply left. No diploma, no permission. He walked away from the German educational system and traveled to Italy to rejoin his family. It was an enormous risk. Without credentials, his future was uncertain. But Einstein had learned something crucial about himself. He would not accept authority he didn't respect. He would not conform to systems that crushed curiosity. This stubborn independence, this willingness to stand alone, would define his entire life. In Italy, Einstein was reborn. The warmth, the light, the beauty of the landscape after grey Munich, it was liberation. He spent months hiking in the mountains, visiting relatives, helping his father with the business, and most importantly, thinking. He continued studying mathematics and physics on his own, following his curiosity wherever it led. But practical reality intruded. Einstein needed formal education if he wanted a career in science. He decided to apply to the prestigious Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich. There was a problem: he lacked a secondary school diploma. However, the Polytechnic allowed exceptional candidates to take an entrance exam. In October 1895, 16-year-old Einstein, 2 years younger than most applicants, sat for the test. The results were telling. He excelled brilliantly in mathematics and physics, scoring among the highest marks ever recorded. But he failed miserably in languages, botany, and zoology, subjects that bored him. Overall, he failed the exam. Most people would have given up. Einstein didn't. The Polytechnic's director, impressed by his mathematical genius, made a suggestion. Complete secondary school in Switzerland, get a diploma, and he'd be guaranteed admission next year. Einstein enrolled in the cantonal school in Aarau, a small Swiss town. This experience transformed him. Unlike the authoritarian German system, Aarau's school embraced progressive teaching methods. Students were encouraged to visualize concepts, to question, to think independently. Teachers treated students with respect. Discussion was valued over memorization. Einstein thrived. He boarded with the Winteller family. His teacher Jost Winteller took him in like a son. Einstein fell in love with the family's daughter, Marie. It was innocent, sweet, his first romance. The year in Aarau was one of pure intellectual and emotional growth. During this time, Einstein began his famous thought experiments. What if you could ride alongside a beam of light? If you traveled at light speed, what would you see? Would the light appear frozen? These weren't idle daydreams, they were profound questions about the nature of light and motion, questions that would haunt him for a decade before he found the answer. In the summer of 1896, Einstein graduated from Aarau with excellent marks. He was accepted to the Polytechnic in Zurich. And in a symbolic act of independence, he formally renounced his German citizenship. He would be stateless for the next 5 years, a man without a country. It suited him perfectly. At 17, Albert Einstein stood at the threshold of his future, armed with a fierce independence, an unquenchable curiosity, and a mind that refused to accept the world as it appeared. He didn't know it yet, but the questions forming in his mind would eventually shatter every certainty about space, time, and reality itself. The journey had truly begun. Chapter 2, The Student Who Skipped Class. October 1896. 17-year-old Albert Einstein walked through the doors of the Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich, one of Europe's finest technical universities. He was enrolled in the teacher training program for mathematics and physics, one of only 11 students accepted that year. Among them was someone who would change his life forever, Mileva Maric, a Serbian woman with a sharp mind and a quiet intensity. Mileva was rare, one of the only female physics students in all of Europe. She walked with a limp from a childhood hip condition, which made her self-conscious, but her intellect was formidable. She and Einstein were drawn to each other immediately. They studied together, solved problems together, argued about physics in cafes late into the night. For Einstein, who had always felt like an outsider, Mileva was a true intellectual equal. For the first time, he was understood. But Einstein's relationship with his professors was a different story entirely. He had a fatal habit: he skipped lectures. Not occasionally, regularly. If a professor bored him or taught in a way he found uninspiring, Einstein simply didn't attend. Instead, he spent hours in cafes reading the latest physics journals, devouring papers by Maxwell, Boltzmann, and other pioneers. He was teaching himself the cutting edge of physics while his professors droned on about outdated theories. His worst relationship was with Heinrich Weber, his physics professor. Weber was competent but conservative, clinging to older ideas. Einstein found his lectures dull and outdated. Worse, Einstein addressed him as Herr Weber instead of Herr Professor, a subtle but deliberate insult in the rigid academic hierarchy of the time. Weber noticed. And he didn't forget. Einstein's friend Marcel Grossmann became his lifesaver. Grossmann attended every lecture, took meticulous notes, and generously shared them with Einstein. Before exams, Einstein would borrow Grossmann's notes and cram frantically. It worked well enough for him to pass, but it created a reputation: brilliant but lazy, arrogant, disrespectful of authority. Meanwhile, Einstein's romance with Mileva deepened. They called each other by pet names: she was his Dolly, he was her Johnny. Their letters reveal passionate discussions about physics mixed with declarations of love. They dreamed of solving the mysteries of the universe together, of building a life around science and each other. But there was a problem: Einstein's mother, Pauline. When Einstein told her about Mileva, she was horrified. Mileva was older than Albert, from a different culture, Orthodox rather than Jewish, and she walked with a limp. Pauline threw herself on the bed and sobbed. "You're ruining your life," she told him. "She's a book like you, but you need a wife." The opposition was fierce and unyielding, and it cast a shadow over the relationship that would never fully lift. In July 1900, Einstein took his final exams. He graduated, but just barely. He finished 4th out of 5 students in his class. Mileva, devastated, failed and would have to retake the exams. More significantly, Einstein's years of skipping class had consequences. In the academic world, young physicists typically became assistants to their professors, who would mentor them and help launch their careers. Every one of Einstein's classmates received an assistantship. Every one, except Einstein. Weber, still smarting from Einstein's disrespect, refused to help him. Worse, he actively worked against him, writing lukewarm or negative letters when Einstein applied to other positions. Einstein was shut out. What followed were 2 of the darkest years of Einstein's life. He applied for academic jobs across Europe. Rejection after rejection arrived. He took temporary teaching positions. One lasted 2 months before he was fired. He tutored. He struggled to pay rent. His father's business was still failing, so there was no family safety net. Einstein, the brilliant graduate, was unemployed and desperate. During this time, Mileva became pregnant. Unmarried, financially unstable, with no prospects, the situation was catastrophic. In 1902, Mileva quietly returned to her parents' home in Serbia and gave birth to a daughter. They named her Lieserl. What happened to Lieserl remains one of history's great mysteries. Einstein never met his daughter. There are hints in letters that she may have been put up for adoption or died of scarlet fever in infancy. But after a few mentions, Lieserl disappears completely from Einstein's correspondence. He never spoke of her again. Not to his second wife, not to his sons, not to anyone. It was as if she had never existed. This silence is one of the most troubling aspects of Einstein's character. Was it shame? Practicality in an era when illegitimate children destroyed reputations? Fear? We'll never know. But the abandonment of Lieserl is a dark stain on the life of a man who would later champion human rights and compassion. By late 1902, Einstein was at his lowest point. 23 years old, unemployed, his relationship with Mileva strained by distance and tragedy, his dreams of a scientific career seemingly dead. He had a doctorate-level understanding of physics but couldn't even get hired to teach high school. Then Marcel Grossmann saved him again. Grossmann's father knew the director of the Swiss Patent Office in Bern, and a position was opening up. With his father's recommendation, Grossmann secured Einstein an interview. The job title was unglamorous: technical expert, 3rd class. The work involved evaluating patent applications for new inventions, checking whether they were original, whether they would actually work. In June 1902, Einstein was hired. It wasn't a university position. It wasn't prestigious. But it was steady income, and it was in Bern, a beautiful city where he could start fresh. Einstein moved there and began his new life as a patent clerk. Most people saw this as failure, the brilliant physics student reduced to office work. But Einstein would later call the patent office a gift. The job required only 6 days a week, 8 hours a day. It kept his mind sharp by forcing him to visualize how mechanical devices worked. And crucially, it left his evenings and Sundays completely free. Free to think. Free to read. Free to pursue the questions that obsessed him. In January 1903, Einstein and Mileva finally married in a small ceremony. No family attended, his mother still refused to accept Mileva. They rented a small apartment in Bern and tried to build a normal life. In 1904, their son Hans Albert was born. Einstein adored him, playing with him for hours, though the demands of fatherhood sometimes frustrated his need for solitude and thinking time. Einstein formed a close circle of friends in Bern who met regularly to discuss philosophy, science, and ideas. They jokingly called themselves the Olympia Academy. They would read works by philosophers and scientists, debate late into the night, and challenge each other's thinking. These discussions sharpened Einstein's ideas and kept his mind engaged. But mostly, Einstein was working in secret. During lunch breaks at the patent office, in the evenings after Hans Albert was asleep, on Sundays in his small apartment, Einstein was thinking about light. About motion. About time. About the questions that had haunted him since he was 16, riding alongside that imaginary beam of light. He was working on problems that the greatest physicists in the world were struggling with. Problems about the nature of atoms, about the strange behavior of light, about whether space and time were absolute or somehow flexible. And he was about to solve them. All of them. In one incredible year. By 1905, the 26-year-old patent clerk, unknown, working in isolation, with no university position, no laboratory, no assistants, was ready to change physics forever. The miracle was about to begin. Chapter 3, The Miracle Year, 1905. Picture a 26-year-old man sitting at a desk in the Swiss patent office, examining applications for improved gravel sorters and electrical regulators. His wife is at home with their infant son. His salary is modest. To the outside world, he's nobody, just another government clerk doing his job. But in stolen moments during lunch breaks, in the evenings after his son is asleep, on Sundays when the city is quiet, this man is dismantling 300 years of physics and rebuilding it from scratch. The year is 1905. And Albert Einstein is about to publish 4 papers that will change everything we know about reality. The first paper arrived in March. Einstein had been obsessed with a puzzle called the photoelectric effect. When light hits certain metals, it knocks electrons loose. Simple enough. But here's the strange part: bright light should knock out more electrons than dim light, right? It doesn't. Instead, it's the color of the light that matters. Blue light works. Red light, no matter how bright, does nothing. This made no sense. According to everything physicists knew, light was a wave. Waves should work by intensity, not color. Einstein proposed something radical. What if light isn't just a wave? What if it also comes in tiny particles, packets of energy he called quanta? Each particle carries a specific amount of energy based on its color. Blue light particles carry more energy than red ones. That's why color matters. It was a wild idea. Light had been proven to be a wave through countless experiments. Einstein was suggesting it was also a particle. Both things at once. It seemed impossible. But it explained the photoelectric effect perfectly. This paper would eventually win Einstein the Nobel Prize. But in 1905, most physicists dismissed it as interesting but probably wrong. The second paper came in May. For decades, scientists had argued about whether atoms were real. You couldn't see them. Maybe they were just a useful fiction, a mathematical convenience. Einstein settled the debate once and for all. He tackled something called Brownian motion. If you look at pollen grains floating in water under a microscope, they jitter around randomly, constantly moving in zigzag patterns. Why? Einstein proved it was because invisible water molecules were bombarding the pollen from all sides. He created equations that could predict exactly how the pollen would move based on the size of atoms. When experiments confirmed his predictions, the debate ended. Atoms were real. Einstein had proven the existence of something no one had ever seen. But these first 2 papers, revolutionary as they were, weren't even his biggest achievement that year. The third paper arrived in June. This one would make him immortal. Einstein had been wrestling with a problem since he was 16. What would happen if you could travel alongside a beam of light? He'd spent 10 years thinking about this, and he'd finally found the answer. But the answer was so strange, so contrary to common sense, that it rewrote the rules of reality. He started with two simple principles. First, the laws of physics are the same whether you're standing still or moving at constant speed. Second, light always travels at the same speed, about 186,000 miles per second, no matter how fast you're moving when you measure it. That second principle was the key. If you're on a train moving at 50 miles per hour and you throw a ball forward at 10 miles per hour, someone standing still sees the ball moving at 60 miles per hour, right? But light doesn't work that way. If you're on a spaceship moving at half the speed of light and you shine a flashlight forward, someone standing still doesn't see the light moving at 1.5 times light speed. They see it moving at exactly light speed. So do you. How is that possible? Einstein realized, time and space must be flexible. Time must slow down for moving objects. Space must contract. These aren't illusions, they're real physical effects. The faster you move, the slower your clock ticks compared to someone standing still. The faster you move, the shorter you become in your direction of motion. This was special relativity. Time wasn't absolute. Space wasn't absolute. They bent and stretched depending on motion. The universe was far stranger than anyone had imagined. But Einstein wasn't done. In September, he published a short follow-up paper, just 3 pages long. It contained the most famous equation in history, E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. What did it mean? It meant that mass and energy are the same thing in different forms. A tiny amount of mass contains an enormous amount of energy. The c² part is huge, the speed of light multiplied by itself. This meant that even a paperclip, if you could convert all its mass to energy, could power a city for days. Einstein had no idea this equation would lead to nuclear power and atomic bombs. He was just following the mathematics wherever it led. But he'd discovered something fundamental: matter is frozen energy. Energy is liberated matter. They're two faces of the same coin. 4 papers. 1 year. Written by a patent clerk in his spare time. The photoelectric effect that proved light comes in particles. Brownian motion that proved atoms exist. Special relativity that proved time and space are flexible. And E equals mc squared that proved matter and energy are interchangeable. Any one of these papers would have made Einstein's career. Together, they demolished the old physics that had stood since Newton. They revealed a universe that was quantum, relative, and far more bizarre than anyone had suspected. And here's the most remarkable part: Einstein did all this without a laboratory. Without assistants. Without a university position. He did it with pure thought. He visualized trains and light beams and clocks. He asked, what if, and why not, until he found answers no one else could see. When the papers were published in the prestigious journal Annalen der Physik, the response was muted. A few physicists recognized their importance. Max Planck, the founder of quantum theory, began corresponding with Einstein and championing his work. But most scientists were skeptical or simply didn't understand what Einstein had done. Einstein didn't care. He knew he was right. He'd spent 10 years thinking about these problems, and the mathematics was beautiful, elegant, undeniable. Time would prove him correct. At home, life was complicated. Mileva had helped with some of the mathematical calculations. There's debate about how much she contributed. But the stress of infant care, financial worries, and Einstein's obsessive focus on physics strained their marriage. Einstein could be distant, absorbed in thought, impatient with domestic interruptions. But he had done it. In one miraculous year, working in isolation, unknown to the world, Albert Einstein had discovered how the universe actually works. He'd proven that reality is nothing like it appears. That time can slow down. That space can shrink. That matter is energy in disguise. That light is both wave and particle. The patent clerk had just rewritten physics. Now he had to convince the world he was right. The miracle year was over. But Einstein's journey was just beginning. Chapter 4: Climbing the Mountain. After the miracle year, Einstein expected his papers to cause a sensation. They didn't. Most physicists either ignored them or didn't understand them. Einstein remained stuck in the patent office, still unknown, still unrecognized. But slowly, a few brilliant minds noticed. Max Planck, the most respected physicist in Germany, read Einstein's relativity paper and immediately grasped its importance. He began corresponding with Einstein, asking questions, spreading the word. When Max Planck endorses your work, people pay attention. By 1908, Einstein finally received his first academic appointment, a part-time lecturing position at the University of Bern. The pay was terrible. He kept his patent office job to survive. He'd lecture in the evenings, often to nearly empty classrooms. Once, only 3 students showed up. But it was a start. In 1909, Einstein received his first real academic position as a professor in Zurich. He could finally leave the patent office. At 30, after years in the wilderness, he was becoming a recognized physicist. But recognition brought new pressures. Teaching took time away from research. Students demanded attention. Committees needed his input. Einstein hated administrative work. He wanted to think, to solve problems, to push deeper into the mysteries of the universe. And there was one mystery that obsessed him more than any other: gravity. The moment of insight came in 1907. Einstein was sitting in his chair at the patent office when a thought struck him. He would later call it, the happiest thought of my life. He imagined a man falling from a roof. During the fall, the man wouldn't feel his own weight. He'd be weightless. If he dropped his keys, they'd float beside him. Inside his falling frame of reference, gravity would disappear. This simple observation was profound. It meant that gravity and acceleration were somehow the same thing. A person in an elevator accelerating upward would feel pressed to the floor exactly as if gravity had increased. A person in free fall would feel weightless exactly as if gravity had vanished. Gravity wasn't something separate from motion, they were intimately connected. But how? Einstein began working on extending his theory of relativity to include gravity. It was brutally difficult. Special relativity dealt with constant motion. Gravity involved acceleration, changing motion, forces. The mathematics became exponentially more complex. Einstein moved from Zurich to Prague in 1911, then back to Zurich in 1912, climbing the academic ladder. His reputation was growing. But his marriage was dying. Mileva had hoped that success would bring happiness. Instead, Einstein became more distant, more absorbed in his work. He expected Mileva to handle all domestic duties while he thought about physics. The woman who had been his intellectual partner was reduced to running the household while caring for their 2 sons, Hans Albert and Eduard, born in 1910. The warmth between them evaporated. Einstein became critical, demanding, cold. Mileva became depressed and resentful. They lived together but were essentially separated, 2 strangers sharing a house. In 1914, Einstein received the ultimate offer, a position in Berlin at the Prussian Academy of Sciences. No teaching requirements. A generous salary. The chance to work with the greatest scientific minds in Germany. It was everything he'd dreamed of. But there was a complication: his cousin Elsa lived in Berlin. And Einstein had been having an affair with her. Elsa was everything Mileva wasn't: socially graceful, accommodating, content to support Einstein's work without intellectual competition. She didn't challenge him. She didn't need to be his equal. She would happily manage his life while he pursued his science. Einstein moved to Berlin. Mileva reluctantly came with him, bringing the boys. Within 3 months, the marriage collapsed completely. Mileva took the children back to Zurich. Einstein remained in Berlin, alone, finally free to work without domestic obligations, and free to be with Elsa. Now Einstein threw himself completely into his work on gravity. He was trying to understand how matter curves space and time itself. Imagine space as a stretched rubber sheet. Put a bowling ball on it, it creates a dip. That dip is what we call gravity. Planets and stars don't pull on each other. They roll along the curves created by each other's mass. But translating this vision into mathematics was torturous. Einstein needed advanced mathematics he didn't fully understand, tensor calculus, non-Euclidean geometry. Fortunately, his old friend Marcel Grossmann, who had saved him twice before, helped him learn the necessary math. For 8 years, Einstein struggled. He'd think he had it, then find an error. He'd develop equations, then discover they didn't work. He suffered headaches, stomach problems, exhaustion. At one point he was so convinced he'd failed that he nearly gave up. Then, in November 1915, everything clicked. In a burst of creative frenzy, Einstein completed his general theory of relativity. The equations were beautiful, elegant, perfect. They described how massive objects curve the fabric of spacetime, and how that curvature guides the motion of everything in the universe. But were they correct? Einstein needed proof. He made 3 predictions that could be tested. The first involved Mercury. The planet's orbit had a tiny wobble that Newton's gravity couldn't explain. Einstein's equations explained it perfectly. When Einstein calculated Mercury's orbit using his new theory and the numbers matched observations exactly, he was so excited he had heart palpitations. But the real test would be more dramatic. Einstein predicted that light from stars should bend when passing near the Sun. Light travels in straight lines through flat space, but space near the Sun is curved. During a solar eclipse, when stars near the Sun become visible, their light should appear shifted from where they actually are. The problem was World War I had just begun. Europe was tearing itself apart. Scientific expeditions to observe eclipses were impossible. Einstein, a pacifist living in militaristic Germany, watched in horror as nations destroyed each other. His science would have to wait. Meanwhile, he formalized his divorce from Mileva in 1919. The terms were harsh. He would send her money but rarely see his sons. He offered her a strange deal. When he won the Nobel Prize, he was that confident, he would give her the prize money. Mileva, bitter and exhausted, agreed. Einstein married Elsa soon after. It was a practical arrangement more than a passionate romance. Elsa took care of him, managed his correspondence, protected him from intrusions. Einstein got the domestic peace he needed to work. It wasn't romantic, but it functioned. By the end of 1915, Einstein had achieved something extraordinary. He'd extended relativity to include gravity, showing that massive objects don't pull on each other through empty space. Instead, they warp space and time itself, creating the curves we interpret as gravitational attraction. Matter tells space how to curve. Space tells matter how to move. It was the most beautiful theory in physics, elegant, powerful, revolutionary. Einstein had climbed the mountain and planted his flag at the summit. He'd shown that the universe was even stranger than special relativity suggested. Space and time weren't just flexible, they were dynamic, curved, shaped by matter and energy. But he still needed proof that the world would accept. And that proof was coming. In 1919, an eclipse expedition would make Einstein the most famous scientist on Earth. The climb was nearly complete. The world was about to notice. Chapter 5, Lights All Askew in the Heavens. World War I finally ended in November 1918. Europe lay in ruins, millions dead, economies shattered. But for Einstein, the end of the war meant something else. Scientists could finally test his theory. The test required a total solar eclipse. During normal daylight, stars near the sun are invisible, the sun's brightness drowns them out. But during an eclipse, when the moon blocks the sun's disk, stars near the sun's edge become visible for a few precious minutes. If Einstein was right, the sun's mass would curve spacetime, bending the light from those stars. They would appear slightly shifted from their true positions. The amount of bending Einstein predicted was tiny, less than 2 seconds of arc, about the width of a quarter seen from 2 miles away. Measuring something so small required precision, perfect weather, and luck. Sir Arthur Eddington, a British astronomer and Quaker pacifist, championed the expedition. Despite the war, despite Einstein being German, Eddington believed science transcended national boundaries. He convinced the Royal Society to fund 2 expeditions for the May 29, 1919 eclipse, one to Sobral, Brazil, and one to the island of Principe off the coast of West Africa. Eddington himself led the Principe team. Einstein waited. He claimed to be confident. When a student asked what he'd do if the results contradicted his theory, Einstein replied, "Then I would feel sorry for the dear Lord. The theory is correct." But underneath the bravado, he must have been nervous. Everything depended on these measurements. The eclipse came. The teams photographed the stars. Then began the painstaking work of analyzing the images, measuring positions, calculating angles. Weeks passed. Then months. On September 22, 1919, Eddington sent Einstein a telegram. The results confirmed his prediction. Light bent. Space curved. Einstein was right. Einstein's response was characteristically understated. He sent a postcard to his mother, "Good news today. H.A. Lawrence has telegraphed me that the English expeditions have really proved the light deflection near the sun." But the world's response was anything but understated. On November 6, 1919, the Royal Society held a joint meeting with the Royal Astronomical Society to announce the results. The Times of London reported it under the headline, "Revolution in Science, New Theory of the Universe, Newtonian Ideas Overthrown." Then, on November 10, the New York Times ran a headline that made Einstein a household name, "Lights all Askew in the Heavens, Men of Science More or Less Agog, Einstein Theory Triumphs." Overnight, Einstein became the most famous scientist in the world. More famous than any scientist before him. More famous than presidents or kings. His face appeared on magazine covers. Newspapers tried to explain relativity to confused readers. Reporters mobbed him wherever he went. People stopped him on the street asking for autographs. Why did Einstein capture the public imagination so completely? Partly timing. The world had just emerged from the horror of World War I. People were desperate for something hopeful, something that transcended the hatred between nations. Here was a German scientist whose theory was proven by British scientists, cooperation replacing conflict. Science rising above politics. But it was also the sheer strangeness of the discovery. Space itself could bend. Time could slow down. The universe was not what it seemed. It was almost magical, yet it was real, proven science. Einstein became a symbol of human intellect triumphing over the ordinary limits of perception. And Einstein himself was perfect for celebrity. His wild hair, his rumpled clothes, his kind eyes, his gentle humor, he looked like everyone's idea of an eccentric genius. He was approachable, quotable, willing to engage with the public. He didn't stand on ceremony or demand respect. He wore no socks, played the violin, sailed his little boat. But fame was a double-edged sword. Einstein's privacy vanished. Every action was scrutinized. His personal life became public entertainment. Journalists invented stories. Cranks sent him theories. His mailbox overflowed. Strangers approached him constantly. He tried to be gracious, but the attention was exhausting. More seriously, fame made him a target. Anti-Semitism was rising in Germany, and Einstein became a lightning rod for hatred. Some German physicists, motivated by nationalism and racism, attacked relativity as Jewish physics. They held meetings denouncing Einstein. They published pamphlets claiming his theories were fraudulent. One physicist, Philipp Leonard, a Nobel laureate himself, became a vicious enemy, later joining the Nazi Party. Einstein tried to ignore the attacks, but they stung. This was his homeland turning against him because of his heritage. He responded by embracing his Jewish identity more strongly. He became a vocal supporter of Zionism, though his vision was of Jews and Arabs living together peacefully in Palestine, not a nationalist project. In 1921, Einstein received the Nobel Prize in Physics. But here's the ironic part, he didn't win it for relativity. The Nobel Committee was too conservative, too uncertain. Instead, they awarded it for his 1905 paper on the photoelectric effect. The work that proved light comes in particles. Important work, yes, but not his greatest achievement. Einstein didn't attend the ceremony. He was in Japan on a lecture tour when the announcement came. When he finally received the prize money, he kept his word, he gave it all to Mileva, part of their divorce settlement. It was a huge sum, enough to buy 3 houses in Zurich. Mileva used it to support herself and their sons. Through the 1920s, Einstein traveled the world. America, Japan, Palestine, South America, everywhere he went, massive crowds gathered. Universities awarded him honors. Politicians sought his opinions. He became more than a scientist, he was a public intellectual, a voice for peace, reason, and international cooperation. He spoke out for pacifism, for disarmament, for reconciliation between nations. He used his fame as a platform, believing that scientists had a moral responsibility to guide humanity toward wisdom. But his political activism made him even more enemies, especially among German nationalists who saw pacifism as treason. At home, life with Elsa was comfortable but not passionate. She managed his affairs, protected him from intrusions, arranged his schedule. Einstein appreciated her devotion but remained emotionally distant. He had affairs, Einstein was never faithful to any woman. Elsa knew but accepted it. She had what she wanted, prestige, security, and the role of caring for the great Einstein. Meanwhile, Einstein continued his science. He was engaged in increasingly heated debates about quantum mechanics, the strange new physics of the atomic world. Einstein had helped birth quantum theory with his 1905 photoelectric effect paper, but he hated where it was going. Quantum mechanics said that reality at the smallest scales was probabilistic, uncertain, fundamentally random. This offended Einstein's deepest convictions. God does not play dice with the universe, he famously said. He believed there must be deeper laws, hidden variables that would restore certainty and determinism. He was wrong, quantum mechanics would be proven correct again and again, but his objections pushed the theory forward, forcing its defenders to sharpen their arguments. By the late 1920s, Einstein had achieved everything a scientist could dream of. He'd revolutionized physics twice, with special and general relativity. He'd won the Nobel Prize. He was world-famous, celebrated, honored. He had a comfortable life in Berlin, Germany's intellectual capital. But dark clouds were gathering. The Weimar Republic was fracturing. Economic crisis bred desperation. And in that desperation, a dangerous movement was rising, one that would force Einstein to flee for his life and would eventually turn his equation, E=mc², into the most destructive force humanity had ever unleashed. The fame was established. The storm was coming. Chapter 6, God Does Not Play Dice. Through the 1920s, Einstein found himself in an ironic position. He was the world's most famous physicist, yet he was increasingly out of step with where physics was heading. The problem was quantum mechanics. A new generation of brilliant physicists, Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, Max Born, Wolfgang Pauli, were developing a revolutionary theory of the atomic world. And it was deeply strange. According to quantum mechanics, particles don't have definite positions until you measure them. An electron doesn't orbit an atom like a planet orbits the sun. Instead, it exists in a cloud of probability, potentially everywhere at once, until an observation collapses it into a specific location. Reality at the quantum level isn't determined, it's probabilistic. Einstein hated this. His whole career had been built on finding the hidden order behind apparent chaos. He'd shown that seemingly random Brownian motion was actually atoms colliding. He'd revealed that the weird behavior of light had an elegant explanation. He believed the universe operated by strict, deterministic laws. The idea that God played dice, that reality was fundamentally random, offended his deepest convictions. He engaged in legendary debates with Niels Bohr, the father of quantum theory. Einstein would devise clever thought experiments designed to prove quantum mechanics was incomplete. Bohr would spend sleepless nights finding the flaw in Einstein's reasoning. Their debates sharpened both men's thinking and pushed physics forward, even though Einstein was fighting a losing battle. In 1935, Einstein published his most famous challenge to quantum mechanics with two colleagues, Boris Podolsky and Nathan Rosen. The paper became known as the EPR paradox. It described a scenario where measuring one particle would instantly affect another particle far away, what Einstein mockingly called spooky action at a distance. Surely this was absurd, Einstein argued. Surely it proved quantum mechanics was incomplete. He was wrong. Decades later, experiments would prove that quantum entanglement, that spooky action, was real. Einstein's intuition had failed him. But his stubborn opposition had forced quantum physicists to confront the implications of their theory and understand it more deeply. Meanwhile, Einstein pursued his own quest, a unified field theory. He wanted one elegant set of equations that would explain everything: gravity, electromagnetism, the quantum world, all unified into a single framework. It became his obsession, consuming decades of work. He never succeeded. The unified theory remains unsolved to this day. But Einstein's scientific debates weren't his biggest problem in the 1920s and early 1930s. The real threat was political. Germany was crumbling. The Treaty of Versailles had imposed crushing reparations after World War I. Hyperinflation destroyed savings. People wheeled barrows of worthless money to buy bread. Desperation and humiliation bred extremism. And the extremists found a convenient scapegoat: Jews. Einstein, the most famous Jew in Germany, became a target. Anti-Semitic newspapers attacked him constantly. His theories were dismissed as Jewish physics, corrupted, un-German, fraudulent. Public meetings were held denouncing him. Threats arrived in his mail. One organization put a price on his head, literally offering money for his assassination. Einstein tried to maintain his humor. When a book titled 100 Authors Against Einstein was published, he quipped, "If I were wrong, one would have been enough." But underneath the wit was real fear. These weren't abstract intellectual disagreements, these were death threats. In 1930, the Nazi Party gained massive support in elections. Adolf Hitler, who had been a fringe figure, was now a major political force. His rhetoric was violent, explicitly anti-Semitic, and increasingly mainstream. Einstein watched with horror as the country he'd lived in for nearly 2 decades descended into madness. His personal life brought its own sorrows. In 1936, Elsa died after a long illness. Their marriage had never been passionate, but she'd been his companion and protector for 17 years. Her death left Einstein more isolated than ever. His relationship with his sons was complicated and painful. Hans Albert, his older son, had become an engineer despite Einstein's initial objections. Their relationship was cordial but distant. Eduard, the younger son, showed early brilliance and sensitivity. He loved music and literature. He adored his father. But in his 20s, Eduard developed schizophrenia. He spent much of his life in psychiatric institutions. Einstein rarely visited him, sending money but maintaining painful distance. Whether this was inability to cope with mental illness or simple emotional coldness, it remains one of Einstein's most troubling failures as a father. By 1932, Einstein knew he had to leave Germany. The signs were unmistakable. Jews were being beaten in the streets. Nazi thugs disrupted university lectures. Hitler was on the verge of power. Einstein accepted a position at the newly created Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. He would split his time between Berlin and Princeton, or so he thought. In December 1932, Einstein and Elsa left for what was supposed to be a brief trip to America. Einstein looked back at his apartment as they departed and told Elsa, "Take a good look. You will never see it again." She thought he was being melodramatic. He wasn't. On January 30, 1933, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Within weeks, the Nazi regime began purging Jews from universities. Einstein's apartment was raided. His bank account was seized. His sailboat was confiscated. His citizenship was revoked. Books by Jewish authors, including Einstein's works, were burned in massive bonfires. Einstein was in America when the news arrived. He would never return to Germany. After decades living in Berlin, the city that had celebrated his genius, he was now exiled, stripped of citizenship, his property stolen, his life threatened. He renounced his German citizenship for the second time in his life. The first had been as a teenager escaping militarism, the second as a 53-year-old fleeing genocide. The country that had once honored him now wanted him dead. Other refugee scientists fled as the situation worsened. The Nazis were systematically destroying German science, driving away its greatest minds. Ironically, this brain drain would cost Germany dearly and benefit the Allied powers, especially America, which gained an influx of brilliant refugees. Einstein settled in Princeton, a small university town in New Jersey. It was as far from the chaos of Europe as he could imagine. Quiet, leafy, peaceful. He bought a modest house on Mercer Street. No mansion, no ostentation, just a simple two-story home where he could work in peace. He was safe. But he was also in exile, watching from across the ocean as the country he'd lived in descended into barbarism. Friends and colleagues who hadn't escaped in time were trapped. The world was sliding toward another war. And Einstein, the pacifist who had spoken out against all violence, would soon face an impossible choice. His equation, E equals mc squared, the elegant relationship between matter and energy that he discovered in 1905, was about to become something he'd never imagined. Something terrible. Something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The refuge was temporary. The storm was just beginning. Chapter 7, Refuge in Princeton. Princeton, New Jersey was everything Berlin wasn't. Quiet. Provincial. Safe. Einstein settled into his modest house on Mercer Street and tried to build a new life in this strange new country. The Institute for Advanced Study was perfect for him, no teaching requirements, no administrative duties, just pure research. He had an office, a blackboard, and time to think. Other refugee scientists arrived, mathematicians, physicists, intellectuals fleeing the nightmare engulfing Europe. Princeton became a sanctuary for displaced genius. Einstein adapted to American life with bemused fascination. He loved the informality, the lack of rigid social hierarchies. In Germany, titles and protocols had been everything. In America, students called professors by their first names. Einstein, who'd always chafed at formality, felt liberated. He became a familiar sight in Princeton, walking to his office in rumpled clothes, lost in thought, his white hair wild. Children would greet him on the street. He'd help them with homework. Once, a young girl knocked on his door asking for math tutoring. He agreed, making her promise not to tell anyone because he'd be swamped with requests. Of course, everyone found out. That was Einstein, simultaneously the world's most famous scientist and somehow still approachable, human, kind. But beneath the surface calm, Einstein was deeply troubled. Letters from Europe brought increasingly horrific news. Jewish colleagues lost their jobs, then their property, then their freedom. Synagogues burned. Laws stripped Jews of basic rights. The Nuremberg laws of 1935 made Jews non-citizens in their own country. Einstein's relatives still in Germany faced increasing danger. Einstein threw himself into helping refugees. He wrote affidavits, signed sponsorship papers, used his fame to secure visas. He understood viscerally what it meant to be stateless, to flee, to start over with nothing. Every person he helped save was a small victory against the darkness. His scientific work continued, but with less revolutionary impact. He remained obsessed with finding a unified field theory, publishing paper after paper attempting to unite gravity and electromagnetism into one elegant framework. His younger colleagues at the institute were polite but skeptical. They were exploring quantum mechanics, the new frontier. Einstein's quest seemed increasingly quixotic, a brilliant mind pursuing an impossible dream. The quantum debates intensified. Einstein would devise clever challenges to quantum theory. His colleagues, particularly younger physicists like Wolfgang Pauli and Leon Rosenfeld, would shoot them down. Einstein was fighting the future, and the future was winning. But even in defeat, his objections forced quantum mechanics to become more rigorous, more carefully defined. In 1936, Einstein became an American citizen. He studied for the test earnestly, learning about American history and government. At the citizenship ceremony, the judge asked him about relativity. Einstein demurred. "I don't think that question is relevant to this exam," he said with a smile. He was proud to be American, relieved to have a country again after years of statelessness. His personal life remained complicated. After Elsa's death, Einstein had relationships with several women, but never remarried. His secretary, Helen Dukas, managed his life with fierce devotion, protecting his time, filtering his correspondence, keeping chaos at bay. His stepdaughter Margot, Elsa's daughter from her first marriage, lived with him and provided companionship. His relationship with his sons remained strained. Hans Albert had moved to America and became a respected engineer. They saw each other occasionally, but the warmth was gone. Too much distance, too much hurt. Edouard remained in Switzerland, institutionalized, his brilliant mind destroyed by schizophrenia. Einstein sent money but rarely wrote. The guilt must have been enormous, but Einstein couldn't, or wouldn't, confront it. By 1939, the world situation had become catastrophic. Hitler had annexed Austria and Czechoslovakia. In September, Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France declared war. World War II had begun. Einstein, the lifelong pacifist, faced an agonizing dilemma. He'd spent decades advocating for peace, for disarmament, for international cooperation. He'd refused military service as a young man. He'd spoken out against World War I. But this was different. This was Hitler. This was genocide. Sometimes, he realized with bitter sorrow, evil had to be fought. Then, in the summer of 1939, disturbing news reached him. German scientists had discovered nuclear fission, splitting uranium atoms released enormous energy. Einstein immediately understood the implications. His equation, E equals mc squared, predicted that splitting atoms could release devastating power. If the Nazis developed an atomic bomb first, they would be unstoppable. A group of refugee physicists, led by Leo Szilard and Eugene Wigner, came to Einstein with an urgent request. They needed to warn President Roosevelt about the danger. But they were unknown foreigners. Roosevelt wouldn't listen to them. They needed Einstein's name, Einstein's prestige. Einstein agonized over the decision. He understood what they were asking. His signature would launch America's effort to build the most destructive weapon ever conceived. The peaceful applications of nuclear energy would be militarized. His equation would become a tool of mass death. But if Germany got the bomb first? If Hitler had that power? The choice was impossible, but the alternative was unthinkable. On August 2, 1939, Einstein signed the letter. It was addressed to President Roosevelt and warned that uranium could be used to create extremely powerful bombs of a new type. It urged the government to secure uranium supplies and support nuclear research before Germany did. The letter reached Roosevelt in October, just weeks after the war began. Roosevelt created a committee to investigate. Progress was slow at first, then accelerated dramatically after Pearl Harbor in 1941. The Manhattan Project was born, a massive, secret effort involving thousands of scientists and billions of dollars, all aimed at building an atomic bomb before Germany could. Einstein himself played almost no role in the Manhattan Project. The government considered him a security risk, too famous, too publicly outspoken, too politically unreliable. He was kept in the dark about the project's progress. Occasionally, colleagues would consult him on specific theoretical questions without revealing the context. That was the extent of his involvement. He spent the war years at Princeton, working on his theories, helping refugees when possible, speaking out against fascism. He contributed to the war effort in small ways, auctioning off a handwritten copy of his 1905 relativity paper to raise money for war bonds. The manuscript sold for $6 million. But mostly, he waited. Waited for news from Europe. Waited for the war to end. Waited to learn what his equation, his beautiful, elegant E=mc², would become in the hands of the military. He didn't know that in secret laboratories in Los Alamos, New Mexico, physicists were racing to turn his theory into reality. He didn't know they would succeed. He didn't know that in just a few years, 2 cities would be vaporized in an instant, and his equation would be written in fire across the sky. The letter was sent. The project was underway. And Einstein, the man who'd unlocked the secret of matter and energy, could only wait to see what humanity would do with the knowledge he'd given them. The Refuge was ending. The atomic age was about to begin. Chapter 8, The Letter and the Bomb. For 6 years, Einstein knew almost nothing about what his letter had set in motion. The Manhattan Project was one of the best-kept secrets in history. Thousands of people working in secrecy across multiple sites, Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, Hanford, building the most destructive weapon ever conceived. And Einstein, whose equation made it all possible, was deliberately kept in the dark. The irony was intentional. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI had been watching Einstein for years. They considered him a security risk, too politically outspoken, too sympathetic to socialism, too willing to question authority. His pacifist past, his support for civil liberties, his friendships with suspected radicals all went into a file that eventually grew to 1,427 pages. The man who'd warned America about the atomic bomb was deemed too dangerous to be trusted with information about actually building it. Einstein spent the war years continuing his work on unified field theory, consulting on minor naval projects, and speaking out against fascism. He gave speeches, wrote articles, raised money for war bonds. But the great theoretical work that would help build the bomb? He was excluded. Meanwhile, in Los Alamos, physicists led by J. Robert Oppenheimer worked feverishly. Many of them were refugees Einstein had helped, his intellectual children, in a sense. They were brilliant, dedicated, and increasingly aware of the magnitude of what they were creating. Some had moral qualms. Most pushed them aside. Germany might get the bomb first. That fear overrode everything. By spring 1945, Germany was collapsing. Hitler was dead. The European war ended on May 8. But the Manhattan Project continued. The target now was Japan, still fighting desperately in the Pacific. Then, on July 16, 1945, in the New Mexico desert at a site called Trinity, they tested the first atomic bomb. At 5:29 in the morning, the device detonated. A flash brighter than 1,000 suns. A fireball that vaporized the steel tower holding the bomb. A mushroom cloud rising miles into the sky. The desert sand fused into radioactive glass. Oppenheimer, watching, famously quoted Hindu scripture, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The test was successful beyond their most optimistic predictions. The bomb worked. America now possessed a weapon of unimaginable power. Einstein knew nothing about Trinity. He was at his summer cottage in Saranac Lake, New York, vacationing, sailing his small boat, thinking about physics. He had no idea that his equation had just been demonstrated in the most dramatic way possible. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber named Enola Gay dropped a uranium bomb nicknamed Little Boy on Hiroshima, Japan. The bomb detonated 1,900 feet above the city. In an instant, the temperature at ground zero reached millions of degrees. Everything within a mile was obliterated. People were vaporized, leaving only shadows burned into walls. Buildings collapsed. Fires erupted across the city. Between 70,000 and 80,000 people died immediately. Tens of thousands more would die from radiation poisoning in the weeks and months that followed. 3 days later, on August 9, a plutonium bomb called Fat Man destroyed Nagasaki. Another 40,000 people killed instantly. Another city turned to ash. Einstein was at home in Princeton when he heard the news. His assistant Helen Dukas answered the door to find a reporter asking for his reaction. "Oh my God," Einstein said. That was all. Just those 3 words, heavy with horror and regret. Later, he would say more. "I made one great mistake in my life, when I signed the letter to President Roosevelt recommending that atom bombs be made." He understood, rationally, why he'd done it. The fear of Hitler getting the bomb first had been real. But Germany had never come close to building one. The Nazi nuclear program had been disorganized, under-resourced, ultimately a failure. The threat Einstein had warned against had never materialized. And now 2 cities were gone. Hundreds of thousands dead. Many from a weapon that worked because E equals mc squared, his equation, his discovery, his gift to humanity turned into an instrument of apocalypse. Einstein spent the rest of his life wrestling with this burden. He became one of the most vocal advocates for nuclear disarmament, for international control of atomic weapons, for world government as the only way to prevent nuclear war. "The unleashed power of the atom has changed everything save our modes of thinking," he wrote, "and we thus drift toward unparalleled catastrophe." Some physicists who'd worked on the bomb felt pride in their achievement, they'd helped end the war, saved American lives. Others, like Oppenheimer, were tormented by what they'd created. Einstein felt something else, a profound sorrow that his life's work, his quest to understand the universe's deepest laws, had led to this. He gave interviews warning about nuclear weapons. He joined movements for peace. He signed petitions calling for disarmament. He used his fame, his voice, every platform available to argue that humanity had to evolve beyond war or face extinction. "I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought," he said, "but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." Critics attacked him as naive, as a scientist meddling in politics, as insufficiently grateful for the bomb that ended the war. Einstein didn't care. He'd seen where pure science without moral consideration led. He believed scientists had a special responsibility, they'd unlocked these powers, so they had to guide humanity in using them wisely. The Cold War was beginning. America and the Soviet Union, wartime allies, became enemies. Both sides rushed to build more bombs, bigger bombs, hydrogen bombs that made the Hiroshima bomb look tiny by comparison. The arms race Einstein had feared was accelerating. In 1946, he appeared on the cover of Time magazine with a mushroom cloud behind him and his equation E=mc² written across it. The image captured the paradox: a gentle, kind man forever linked to mass destruction. A theoretical physicist whose abstract equation had become terrifyingly concrete. Einstein tried to return to his science, to lose himself in equations and theories. But the shadow of the bomb never left him. Every time he wrote E=mc² on a blackboard, did he think of Hiroshima? Every time he contemplated the relationship between matter and energy, did he see the flash over Nagasaki? He'd wanted to understand how the universe worked. He'd succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams. But understanding came with consequences. Knowledge was power, and power could destroy as easily as create. Einstein, who'd spent his life seeking truth through pure thought, learned that truth was never pure, never separate from the messy, dangerous, morally complicated world of human affairs. The war was over. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. The atomic age had begun. And Einstein, who'd helped birth it with a letter he'd signed 6 years earlier, would spend his remaining decade trying to prevent the destruction he'd helped make possible. If only I had known, he said years later, I would have become a watchmaker. Or a locksmith. Or anything other than the physicist who showed humanity how to split the atom. The equation was beautiful. The consequences were terrible. And Einstein carried that weight for the rest of his life. Chapter 9, The Elder Statesman. The decade after Hiroshima was Einstein's final chapter, 10 years of reflection, activism, and continued pursuit of scientific truth. He was now in his late 60s, his hair completely white, his face lined with age and sorrow. But his mind remained sharp, his moral voice clear, his commitment to peace unwavering. Post-war America was consumed by Cold War paranoia. The Soviet Union had been an ally against Hitler, but now it was the enemy. The Iron Curtain divided Europe. Nuclear weapons stockpiles grew on both sides. Fear of communist infiltration gripped America, and that fear would soon explode into hysteria. Einstein found himself in J. Edgar Hoover's crosshairs. The FBI director despised Einstein, too liberal, too outspoken, too willing to challenge American policy. Hoover's agents followed Einstein, tapped his phone, opened his mail, interviewed his associates. They were building a case that Einstein was a security threat, possibly even a communist sympathizer. The accusations were absurd. Einstein wasn't a communist, he valued individual freedom too much for that. But he was a socialist who believed in economic justice. He opposed militarism and nationalism. He defended civil liberties. In the paranoid atmosphere of the late 1940s and early 1950s, those positions made him suspect. When McCarthyism swept America, Senator Joseph McCarthy's campaign to root out alleged communists, Einstein spoke out fearlessly. When scientists and teachers were hauled before loyalty boards and asked to name names, Einstein advised them to refuse. Every intellectual who is called before one of these committees ought to refuse to testify, he wrote publicly. It was courageous and unpopular. Many thought he was being reckless. But Einstein had lived through Nazi Germany. He'd watched as fear and conformity destroyed a democracy. He wasn't going to stay silent while America drifted toward authoritarianism, even in the name of fighting communism. His most controversial stance was his advocacy for world government. Einstein believed nationalism was the root of war. Individual nations pursuing their own interests would inevitably conflict. The only solution, he argued, was a global federation with the power to prevent war and control nuclear weapons. It was idealistic, perhaps naive, but Einstein was convinced it was humanity's only hope. He also became deeply involved in civil rights. Einstein had always opposed racism, he'd been horrified by America's segregation when he first arrived. In the post-war years, he used his voice to support the emerging civil rights movement. He spoke at Lincoln University, a historically black college. He became friends with Paul Robeson, the great singer and actor who was blacklisted for his political views. When the NAACP asked Einstein to testify as an expert witness in discrimination cases, he agreed. When Marian Anderson, the black opera singer who'd been barred from performing at Constitution Hall, came to Princeton, Einstein invited her to stay at his house. His actions were more than symbolic, they were personal stands against injustice. In 1952, Einstein faced an unexpected moment. Chaim Weizmann, the first president of Israel, died. Israeli officials approached Einstein with an extraordinary offer: would he become president of Israel? It was largely a ceremonial position, but it carried immense prestige and symbolic importance. Einstein was deeply moved but declined. "I am deeply moved by the offer from our state of Israel, and at once saddened and ashamed that I cannot accept it," he wrote. He explained that he lacked the natural aptitude and experience for dealing with people and exercising official functions. He was a scientist, not a politician. He would serve the Jewish people and Israel in other ways, but not as president. Through all this public activism, Einstein continued his scientific work. Every day, he walked to his office at the Institute for Advanced Study. Every day, he filled blackboards with equations, still pursuing his unified field theory. His colleagues had mostly moved on to other problems: quantum field theory, particle physics, cosmology. But Einstein remained devoted to his quest. He knew he was failing. Decade after decade of work, and the unified theory remained elusive. Younger physicists thought he was wasting his time. But Einstein couldn't stop. He believed there had to be an underlying unity to nature's forces. He'd found it once, showing that space and time were unified. He'd spent his life trying to find it again. His personal life grew quieter. He lived simply in his house on Mercer Street with his stepdaughter Margot and his secretary Helen Dukas. He played his violin. He sailed his little boat on the lake, though he was getting too old for it. He received visitors, scientists, journalists, admirers. He answered letters from children asking about science. His son Hans Albert visited occasionally. They'd never fully repaired their relationship, too much distance, too much hurt, but there was affection between them. Eduard remained in Switzerland, institutionalized, his brilliant mind lost to schizophrenia. Einstein supported him financially, but the emotional distance remained. It was a failure Einstein never resolved. In his final years, Einstein's health declined. He'd always had stomach problems, and now they worsened. He developed an abdominal aortic aneurysm, a weakening in the wall of his aorta that could rupture at any moment. Doctors recommended surgery. Einstein refused. "I want to go when I want," he told them. "It is tasteless to prolong life artificially. I have done my share, it is time to go. I will do it elegantly." On April 13, 1955, the aneurysm ruptured. Einstein was rushed to Princeton Hospital. He could have had emergency surgery, it might have bought him a few more years. Again, he refused. He wanted to die with dignity, not hooked up to machines. He asked for his latest calculations on unified field theory. Even dying, he wanted to work. He made a few more notes, tried a few more equations. The theory remained unsolved. On April 18, 1955, at 1:15 in the morning, Albert Einstein died. He was 76 years old. His last words were in German, spoken to a night nurse who didn't understand the language. Whatever he said was lost forever. Before dawn, in a bizarre and disturbing epilogue, the pathologist Thomas Harvey performed the autopsy. Without permission from Einstein's family, Harvey removed Einstein's brain, claiming he wanted to preserve it for science. He kept it in jars for decades, studying it, refusing to return it. The brain that had reimagined reality became a stolen specimen, traveling in the trunk of Harvey's car across America. Einstein had wanted to be cremated, his ashes scattered, no grave to become a pilgrimage site. Mostly, his wishes were honored. A small ceremony, a handful of mourners, no spectacle. His body was cremated. But his brain, that remained in Thomas Harvey's possession, a strange and troubling footnote to an extraordinary life. The world mourned. Newspapers ran tributes. World leaders issued statements. The man who'd shown us that time could slow down, that space could curve, that matter and energy were one, he was gone. But his ideas remained. His equations still described reality. His warnings about nuclear weapons still rang true. His example, the curious mind questioning everything, the moral voice speaking truth to power, the human being who was both genius and flawed man, that example endured. Einstein was dead. But his journey through space, time, and imagination would continue to guide humanity long after he was gone. Chapter 10, The Human Einstein. Who was Albert Einstein, really? Beyond the equations and theories, beyond the wild hair and iconic photographs, what kind of man was he? The world remembers the genius. But Einstein was also profoundly, sometimes painfully, human. Understanding the man requires looking past the legend at the contradictions, the flaws, the everyday details that made him real. Start with his appearance. Einstein became famous partly because he looked like everyone's idea of an eccentric genius. The untamed white hair wasn't an affectation, he simply couldn't be bothered with barbers. The rumpled clothes, the worn sweaters, the refusal to wear socks, these weren't fashion statements. Einstein found such things irrelevant. When I was young, he once said, I found out that the big toe always ends up making a hole in a sock. So I stopped wearing socks. Problem solved, in the most Einstein way possible. He had a mischievous sense of humor. When asked to explain relativity in simple terms, he said, put your hand on a hot stove for a minute, and it seems like an hour. Sit with a pretty girl for an hour, and it seems like a minute. That's relativity. It wasn't scientifically accurate, but it was charming and memorable, vintage Einstein. He stuck out his tongue in that famous photograph not as a publicity stunt, but because he was exhausted by photographers on his 72nd birthday and wanted them to leave him alone. The irreverent gesture became one of the most recognizable images in history. Even that was Einstein, tired of ceremony, willing to be silly, incapable of taking himself too seriously despite being the world's most famous scientist. Music was essential to Einstein's life and thinking. His violin, which he named Lena, was his constant companion. He played Mozart sonatas, Beethoven symphonies, Bach concertos. When stuck on a problem, he'd play until the solution emerged. Life without playing music is inconceivable for me, he said. I live my daydreams in music. I see my life in terms of music. The violin wasn't recreation, it was a tool for thought, a way of accessing parts of his mind that pure logic couldn't reach. He loved sailing, despite never learning to swim. This seems reckless until you understand Einstein's relationship with risk. He wasn't physically brave, but intellectually he was fearless. He'd capsize his little boat, get soaked, laugh it off, and climb back in. Sailing gave him solitude and time to think, which he valued above safety or comfort. His relationship with women was complicated and often troubling. He'd been deeply in love with Mileva Merrick, but he'd also been a terrible husband, demanding, cold, emotionally distant. The contract he'd presented her, listing the conditions under which they'd remain married, was cruel. She would do his laundry, bring him 3 meals a day, expect no affection or intimacy. It's painful to read. With Elsa, his second wife, he was kinder but never passionate. She managed his life, he accepted her devotion without reciprocating deeply. He had affairs throughout both marriages. Einstein seemed to need emotional connection but was incapable of sustaining it. Women were drawn to his genius and gentleness, then wounded by his emotional unavailability. His treatment of his children was perhaps his greatest moral failure. Abandoning Lieserl, his illegitimate daughter, is shocking by any standard. His relationship with Hans Albert was distant and sometimes dismissive. Einstein initially opposed Hans Albert's marriage and career choice. Most painfully, his inability to emotionally support Eduard, his younger son who developed schizophrenia, reveals Einstein's limitations. He sent money but rarely visited, seemingly unable to cope with mental illness. Whatever demons Eduard faced, he faced them largely without his father. Yet Einstein was also capable of great kindness. He tutored students for free. He wrote recommendation letters for strangers. He used his fame to help refugees escape Nazi Germany, saving countless lives. When a young girl wrote asking for help with her homework, he responded with patient explanations. When a rabbi asked him whether scientists pray, Einstein wrote a thoughtful, beautiful response that the rabbi treasured for life. He was generous with colleagues, even those who disagreed with him. His debates with Niels Bohr over quantum mechanics were fierce but never personal. They remained friends, respecting each other despite fundamental disagreements. Einstein could separate intellectual combat from human connection. His politics were driven by genuine compassion. He believed in socialism because he saw economic injustice as cruel and irrational. He opposed nationalism because he'd seen it lead to war. He fought for civil rights because racism offended his sense of human dignity. His activism wasn't theoretical, it was rooted in empathy for suffering. Einstein maintained a childlike wonder throughout his life. He never lost the curiosity that made him ask, at 5, why the compass needle pointed north. He never stopped asking, why. Even in his 70s, working on problems he knew he probably couldn't solve, he remained motivated by pure fascination with how the universe worked. He was humble about his achievements in surprising ways. He understood he'd been lucky to be born when physics needed revolutionizing, lucky to have the right mind at the right moment. I have no special talents, he claimed. I am only passionately curious. This was false modesty. He knew his own brilliance, but he also genuinely believed that persistence and curiosity mattered more than raw intelligence. He was both confident and doubtful. Confident in his major insights, he knew relativity was correct even before experiments proved it. But doubtful about smaller things, constantly questioning himself, revising, reconsidering. This combination of certainty and humility drove his greatest work. Einstein's relationship with Judaism was complex. Raised secular, he'd felt little connection to religious practice. But facing anti-Semitism made him embrace Jewish identity culturally and ethnically. He supported the creation of a Jewish homeland but opposed rigid nationalism. He believed in Spinoza's God, the lawful harmony of the universe, not a personal deity who intervened in human affairs. In his final years, Einstein achieved a kind of serenity. He'd made peace with not solving the unified field theory. He'd accepted his failures as a husband and father, even if he couldn't fix them. He'd done his best to guide humanity away from nuclear destruction, knowing he might fail at that too. He'd lived according to his principles, spoken his truth, followed his curiosity wherever it led. The contradictions never resolved. Einstein was kind yet emotionally distant. Humble yet confident. Playful yet serious. A terrible father who loved children. A pacifist who helped build the atomic bomb. A man who revolutionized humanity's understanding of reality but couldn't navigate the simple human relationships in his own life. Perhaps that's what makes him compelling. He wasn't a perfect genius descended from Olympus. He was a human being, flawed, struggling, sometimes failing, who nonetheless managed to see deeper into nature's secrets than perhaps anyone before or since. The wild-haired icon in the photographs was real. But so was the man who abandoned his daughter, who played Mozart when he was stuck, who refused to wear socks, who stuck out his tongue at photographers, who wept at the news of Hiroshima, who kept working on equations until the moment he died. Einstein, the genius we celebrate. Einstein, the human being we should understand. Both are essential to his story. Both are part of his legacy. The man who showed us the universe was stranger than we imagined, was himself stranger and more human than his legend suggests. Chapter 11, Einstein's Universe Today. Einstein died in 1955. But his universe, the strange, beautiful, mathematical reality he revealed, is more alive than ever. Every day, in ways both profound and practical, we live in Einstein's world. Start with something simple, your smartphone's GPS. You check directions, and within seconds, satellites orbiting Earth pinpoint your location to within a few meters. This technology wouldn't work without Einstein's relativity. Here's why. GPS satellites orbit at high speeds and experience weaker gravity than we do on Earth's surface. According to special relativity, time moves slower for fast-moving objects. According to general relativity, time moves faster in weaker gravity. These effects are tiny, just microseconds per day, but GPS requires nanosecond precision. Without Einstein's equations correcting for relativistic time dilation, your GPS would be off by several miles within minutes. Every time you navigate with your phone, you're using Einstein's discoveries. Medical imaging relies on Einstein too. PET scans, positron emission tomography, work because of E=mc². The scan uses antimatter, positrons, which are like electrons but with opposite charge. When a positron meets an electron, both particles annihilate, converting their mass entirely into energy, gamma rays that detectors can measure. Einstein's equation predicts exactly how much energy will be released, allowing doctors to create images that detect cancer, study brain function, and diagnose heart disease. Einstein's most famous equation is literally saving lives every day. Nuclear power plants operate on the same principle. A tiny amount of uranium, when split through fission, releases enormous energy because of mass-energy equivalence. 1 kilogram of uranium, fully converted, contains the energy of millions of kilograms of coal. Einstein didn't invent nuclear power, but his equation explained why it was possible. But Einstein's legacy extends far beyond practical applications. His theories predicted phenomena that seemed like science fiction, and one by one, they've been confirmed as science fact. Take gravitational waves. In 1916, Einstein predicted that violent cosmic events, colliding black holes, exploding stars, would create ripples in spacetime itself, waves of gravity spreading outward at light speed. But these waves would be incredibly weak. Einstein himself doubted they could ever be detected. For a century, physicists tried. They built increasingly sensitive instruments, looking for the tiniest vibrations in spacetime. Then, on September 14, 2015, exactly 100 years after Einstein completed general relativity, the LIGO detectors in Louisiana and Washington registered a signal. Two black holes, each about 30 times the Sun's mass, had collided 1.3 billion light-years away. The collision sent gravitational waves rippling across the universe. When they passed through Earth, they compressed and stretched space by less than the width of a proton. LIGO detected it. Einstein was right. Again. The discovery opened an entirely new way of observing the universe. For all of human history, we'd studied the cosmos through light. Now we could hear spacetime itself vibrating. Gravitational wave astronomy was born, and it exists because Einstein predicted these waves a century earlier. Then there are black holes. Einstein's equations predicted them, regions where gravity is so intense that spacetime curves back on itself, creating a point of no escape. Even light can't escape a black hole's gravity. Einstein found this prediction disturbing and doubted black holes actually existed. They do. We've found thousands of them. In 2019, the Event Horizon Telescope captured the first actual image of a black hole, a supermassive monster at the center of galaxy M87, 6.5 billion times the Sun's mass. The image showed exactly what Einstein's equations predicted, a dark sphere surrounded by a bright ring of light bent by extreme gravity. It was Einstein's mathematics made visible. Closer to home, scientists have confirmed Einstein's prediction about Mercury's orbit. Newton's gravity couldn't fully explain Mercury's motion, the planet's orbit precesses, shifting slightly over time. When Einstein applied general relativity to Mercury, the equations worked perfectly. Space curves around the Sun, and Mercury follows that curve. This was one of the first confirmations that Einstein was right and Newton's 300-year-old theory needed updating. Time dilation has been confirmed in countless experiments. Atomic clocks flown on airplanes tick at different rates than clocks on the ground, exactly as relativity predicts. Muons, subatomic particles created when cosmic rays hit Earth's atmosphere, should decay before reaching the ground, but time slows down for them at high speeds, so they survive longer. Every particle accelerator, every cosmic ray detector, every precision experiment confirms, time is relative. Einstein also helped birth quantum mechanics, though he spent decades fighting its implications. His photoelectric effect paper showed that light comes in discrete packets, photons. This was one of the founding insights of quantum theory. Ironically, lasers, which work because of quantum mechanics, exist because Einstein first explained how light interacts with matter in quantum ways. Today's physicists are still chasing Einstein's dream of a unified theory. He spent 30 years trying to merge gravity and electromagnetism into one elegant framework. He failed, but the quest continues. Modern physicists work on string theory, loop quantum gravity, and other approaches trying to unify general relativity with quantum mechanics. Einstein's final, unsolved problem remains one of physics' grand challenges. There's also Einstein's cosmological constant, his biggest blunder, as he called it. When Einstein first applied general relativity to the universe, his equations predicted the universe should be either expanding or contracting. But everyone knew the universe was static, unchanging. So Einstein added a mathematical term, the cosmological constant, to make his equations predict a static universe. Then Edwin Hubble discovered the universe is expanding. Einstein realized his cosmological constant was unnecessary and regretted adding it. But here's the twist: in 1998, astronomers discovered the universe's expansion is accelerating, driven by something called dark energy. Einstein's cosmological constant, which he thought was a mistake, turns out to describe dark energy remarkably well. His blunder may have been his most prescient insight. Einstein's cultural impact is equally profound. His name became synonymous with genius. You don't need to be an Einstein means, you don't need to be exceptionally smart. Time magazine named him Person of the Century for the 20th century. His image, the wild hair, the thoughtful expression, is instantly recognizable worldwide. He changed how we think about science itself. Before Einstein, physics seemed like discovering eternal truths about an objective reality. Einstein showed that observation matters, that the observer is part of what's observed, that reality depends on your frame of reference. This philosophical shift influenced fields far beyond physics. Art, literature, philosophy all grappled with Einstein's insights about the relativity of truth. He also established the model of the scientist as public intellectual and moral voice. Einstein used his fame to advocate for peace, civil rights, and human dignity. He showed that scientists have responsibilities beyond the laboratory. Many scientists today follow his example, speaking out on climate change, nuclear weapons, and social justice. Perhaps most importantly, Einstein expanded human imagination. He showed us that the universe is stranger, more wonderful, more surprising than common sense suggests. Time can slow down. Space can curve. Matter and energy are interchangeable. Reality at its deepest level defies everyday intuition. This is liberating. If the universe can be so different from how it appears, what else might be possible? Einstein taught us to question assumptions, to look beyond the obvious, to trust mathematics and logic even when they lead to bizarre conclusions. We live in Einstein's universe, a cosmos of curved spacetime, relativistic physics, and quantum strangeness. Every GPS navigation, every medical scan, every observation of black holes and gravitational waves confirms the reality he revealed. But we also live with Einstein's warnings. Nuclear weapons still threaten humanity. The arms race continues. Climate change and other existential risks require the kind of innovative thinking Einstein exemplified. His scientific legacy is secure, the equations work, the predictions confirmed. His moral legacy remains unfinished. He challenged us to think beyond nationalism, to choose peace over war, to use knowledge wisely. That challenge still awaits our answer. Einstein's journey through space, time, and imagination gave us a new universe. What we do with that gift, that's up to us. Chapter 12, Lessons from a Revolutionary Life. What can we learn from Albert Einstein? What does his journey teach us about living, thinking, and creating in our own lives? Einstein's story isn't just about physics equations and cosmic discoveries. It's about a way of approaching the world, a method of thinking that we can all learn from, whether we're scientists or not. Question everything. Einstein's greatest gift was his willingness to question what everyone else accepted as obvious. Time is absolute. Why? Space is fixed. Says who? Light must be either a wave or a particle. What if it's both? From childhood, when he wondered why a compass needle always pointed north, to his final days, when he questioned whether quantum mechanics was really complete, Einstein never stopped asking, why? He never accepted, because that's how it is, as an answer. This is available to all of us. We don't need genius-level intelligence to question assumptions. We just need curiosity and courage. The next time everyone around you agrees on something, ask yourself, what if they're wrong? What if there's another way to see this? That simple question, what if, can open entirely new possibilities. Trust your imagination. Einstein famously said, imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world. This wasn't just poetic, it was literally his method. His greatest insights came from thought experiments, imagining riding alongside a light beam, imagining a man falling from a roof, imagining what observers moving at different speeds would see. He visualized scenarios in his mind and followed the logic wherever it led, even when it contradicted common sense. We live in a world that values memorization, credentials, and expertise. These matter, but Einstein reminds us that creative imagination matters more. The ability to see things differently, to visualize new possibilities, to ask, what if, and follow the answer, that's where breakthroughs come from. Embrace being different. Einstein was an outsider his entire life. He was a Jewish kid in Catholic schools. A German who renounced his citizenship. A pacifist in militaristic societies. A physicist who skipped lectures and irritated his professors. A thinker whose ideas seemed crazy to his contemporaries. He could have tried to fit in. He could have followed the prescribed path. Instead, he embraced his differences. He wore no socks. He played violin when stuck on problems. He thought in his own unique way. And precisely because he was different, he could see what others missed. Our world pushes conformity. School systems reward following instructions. Workplaces often penalize unconventional thinking. But Einstein's life shows that the person who thinks differently, who doesn't quite fit in, might be the one who changes everything. If you feel like an outsider, that's not a weakness, it's a potential superpower. Your different perspective might let you see solutions invisible to everyone else. Persistence through failure. Einstein's story wasn't one of effortless genius. It was struggle, rejection, and repeated failure. He couldn't get a job after university. He was rejected by every professor. He spent years in the patent office, unknown and unrecognized. He worked 8 years on general relativity, repeatedly thinking he had it, then discovering errors. He spent 30 years on unified field theory and never solved it. But he kept going. He didn't let rejection stop him. He didn't interpret failure as proof he wasn't good enough. He kept thinking, kept working, kept pushing forward. This is perhaps the most important lesson: genius isn't about never failing. It's about not letting failure define you. Einstein failed more than most people, but he also achieved more than almost anyone. The two are connected. You can't reach revolutionary insights without being wrong many times along the way. Simple is beautiful. Einstein believed deeply in the elegance of nature's laws. He thought the universe should be comprehensible through simple, beautiful equations. E equals mc squared is powerful precisely because it's so simple: 3 variables, 1 equation, fundamental truth. He distrusted overly complicated explanations. Everything should be made as simple as possible, he said, but not simpler. Find the essential truth. Strip away the unnecessary complexity. See the pattern underneath. This applies beyond physics. In any field, in any problem, ask, what's the simplest explanation? What's the core principle? Can I make this clearer, more elegant, more fundamental? Complexity often hides confusion. Clarity reveals truth. Follow your curiosity. Einstein didn't study physics because it would make him famous or wealthy. He studied it because he was fascinated by how the universe worked. That fascination sustained him through years of obscurity, through rejection, through failure. He once said, "I have no special talents. I am only passionately curious." This was false modesty about his talents, but absolutely true about his motivation. Curiosity was his compass, guiding him to the questions that mattered. In our lives, we're often told to be practical, to choose careers based on security or status. Einstein reminds us that passion matters more. Follow what fascinates you. Chase the questions that won't let you sleep. The problems you can't stop thinking about, those are your problems, the ones you're meant to solve. Science needs morality. Einstein learned, painfully, that scientific knowledge isn't neutral. His equation E equals mc squared led to both nuclear power and nuclear weapons. His letter to Roosevelt helped start the Manhattan Project. The knowledge he'd pursued purely for understanding had terrible practical consequences. He spent his final years arguing that scientists have moral responsibilities. Knowledge is power, and power can destroy or create. Scientists, and really, all of us, must consider not just what we can do, but what we should do. This lesson resonates today. As we develop artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and other powerful technologies, Einstein's warning echoes: discovery without wisdom is dangerous. We need not just clever minds, but moral courage. Think independently. Throughout his life, Einstein refused to let others tell him what to think. He challenged his teachers. He ignored academic fashion. He fought quantum mechanics even when everyone said he was wrong. He spoke out against McCarthyism when it was risky. He advocated for unpopular causes because he believed they were right. Sometimes he was wrong. Quantum mechanics turned out to be correct despite his objections. But his independence of thought pushed physics forward. His willingness to stand alone when necessary changed the world. We live in an age of information overload, where algorithms tell us what to think, where social pressure enforces conformity, where speaking up can be costly. Einstein's example reminds us: think for yourself. Form your own judgments. Don't outsource your conscience or your intellect to the crowd. Never stop learning. Einstein remained curious until his final hours, literally working on equations on his deathbed. He never felt he'd learned enough, understood enough, solved enough. There were always more questions, deeper mysteries. This childlike wonder, maintained into old age, kept his mind alive and flexible. He didn't become rigid in his thinking. He didn't rest on his achievements. He stayed engaged with the mystery of existence until the very end. We can do this too. Stay curious. Keep asking questions. Read widely. Learn constantly. The moment you think you understand everything is the moment you stop growing. The final lesson: mystery is beautiful. Einstein once wrote, "The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science." He spent his life revealing the universe's secrets, but he never lost his sense of wonder at the deeper mysteries that remained. He showed us that reality is far stranger than common sense suggests. Time can slow down. Space can curve. Matter and energy are interchangeable. And underneath these discoveries lie deeper questions still unsolved. This is ultimately Einstein's gift, not just answers, but the reminder that the universe is mysterious and wonderful, that there are always deeper questions, that knowledge expands rather than eliminates wonder. We live in Einstein's universe, a cosmos of curved spacetime and relativistic effects, of quantum strangeness and cosmic mystery. But we also live with Einstein's questions: how do we use knowledge wisely? How do we balance progress with morality? How do we stay curious, creative, and courageous? Einstein's journey through space, time, and imagination gave us a new understanding of reality. But perhaps more importantly, he gave us an example of how to think, how to question, how to persist, how to remain fascinated by the mysteries that surround us. The boy with the compass became the man who redrew reality. And he did it not through some magical genius inaccessible to the rest of us, but through curiosity, persistence, independent thinking, and the courage to see things differently. His story tells us, you don't need to be Einstein. But you can think like Einstein. Question everything. Trust your imagination. Embrace being different. Persist through failure. Follow your curiosity. Think independently. Never stop learning. And most of all, never lose your wonder at the mysterious. Because that wonder, that willingness to ask, why, and what if? That's where all great journeys begin. Einstein's journey is over. But yours continues. What will you discover? Thank you so much for listening to this complete audiobook on Albert Einstein's extraordinary life. I hope his story has inspired you, made you think differently, and reminded you that curiosity and courage can change the world. I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me what you thought of this audiobook. What was your favorite part of Einstein's story? Which lesson resonated most with you? And most importantly, whose biography would you like to hear next? Your feedback helps me create content you'll love. If you enjoyed this journey through Einstein's life, I have another fascinating biography waiting for you. Click on the screen now to watch my audiobook on Michael Jackson, the king of pop whose life was as revolutionary in music as Einstein's was in science. From his childhood in the Jackson 5 to becoming the most iconic entertainer in history, Michael Jackson's story is filled with triumph, tragedy, and transformation.